Hi, it's Kieran here again, and as promised, I'm going to do this video about utilitarianism, which is the moral system which I adhere to. Okay, so in case you don't know about utilitarianism at all, what it is it's a moral, as I say, a moral system that was originated by a guy called Jeremy Bentham about 200 years ago, though I guess it probably existed before that, but he's the guy who gave it its name, and it started the modern thinking within philosophy about it. Now, yeah, quick mention of the name. I mean, I hate the name. Utilitarianism is a terrible mouthful, and it doesn't sum it up particularly well. So the name's a bit of a disaster. We need to, I think, adopt a shorter, more appropriate name for it at some point. Yeah, and so what is it exactly? I think the probably the simplest way to define it, and the way perhaps most people think of it, is that utilitarianism says that what makes an action moral is the amount of happiness that is created by that action. So that would be probably the simplest sort of way of thinking of it. But that definition, actually, a lot of utilitarians wouldn't actually agree to that. So I was just thinking, actually, before I made this video, of what definition all or most utilitarians could agree to, and what I think that definition might be that utilitarianism says that what makes behavior moral is the amount of welfare gained through it. So that would be a more general way of saying it that almost all utilitarians, I think, would agree to. Okay. Now, as you probably get the impression there are sort of different views within utilitarianism. Now, in this video, I'm just going to tell you what my views, what type of utilitarian I am. I've only got time for very brief sort of arguments and justification for my positions in this video. Hopefully I'll make other videos. There's plenty I want to say about utilitarianism. Okay, basically I wanted to get this video made now so that if in future I as I hopefully will do, make sort of response videos to other YouTubers and sort of interact with the YouTube community a bit more than I have done so far, then people can refer back to this video to know what my position is and where I'm coming from, because utilitarianism is this pretty core viewpoint of mine, which informs lots of my other views. Okay, so a bit of background. I've pretty much always been a utilitarian ever since I don't know what age. It's probably as I don't know, 12 or something. Even before I heard the name utilitarian, I just kind of seemed to instinctively have always been a utilitarian. Or most of my early moral thinking seemed to be along these kind of happiness maximizing kind of lines. Actually until fairly recently, actually, I kind of thought pretty much everybody was a utilitarian, or that to the extent that people reflected on morality, people were utilitarian. But apparently not. I mean, a few years ago I did this philosophy MA course, and I really discovered in that one that neither the teachers nor the students were tending to be sympathetic towards utilitarian views. So now I've really come to realise that it isn't that common. It's quite a hated system, and on YouTube it seems to be getting a lot of flack from what I've seen. So yeah, I mean, I think it's always been. I mean, as I was saying in the last video, it's. I believe we have moral instincts, and maybe my moral instinct is a very leans towards having favouring kind of big, grand sort of ethical systems that are very sort of consistent. Or maybe I've just got a very unified kind of moral instinct that really just goes for this kind of happiness thing. Anyway, for whatever reason, I seem to be very much a utilitarian by instinct. Okay, so moving on to what type of utilitarian I am. I've jotted down there's three different ways I can categorize myself. First of all, I'm what's known as a hedonistic utilitarian. There seem to be 2 or 3 different categories here. You can be a hedonistic one, you can be a preference utilitarian. I think there's some other one as well as an objective list, I think it's called utilitarian. Though people can define it in different ways. Basically, I mean, hedonistic utilitarian is one. Basically, I would define my utilitarianism as saying that what makes an action morally, or an action is morally right to the extent that it increases the amount of pleasure in the universe, in present and future. So basically, hedonistic means pleasure-based utilitarian. I wouldn't even call it happiness. I mean, I define happiness as more like kind of long-term pleasure, or like an average level of pleasure that's reasonably high over the long term. So yeah, basically I want to maximize the pleasure in the universe over the long term. These preference utilitarians, which include Peter Singer, who I'm a big fan of. Basically, you find, I think, that these differences don't really lead to huge practical sort of differences in the application of the doctrine. Yeah, basically these preference utilitarians, they tend to they believe that we should maximize people's preferences, whatever they prefer. We want to maximize that. The reason I take the hedonistic view is that it just seems to me that people's preferences might be unreliable. Someone might be mad and prefer to have their legs cut off, or say they prefer that, and that I don't really want them to suffer that because they think it's in their interest. Yeah. And well, I think quite a decisive argument that I thought of here is you could have like a mad dictator in the future, like getting these scientists to genetically engineer someone who thinks they want pain, or says they prefer pain over pleasure, and this dictator might just bring these people into the world just for sadistic joke. But also it's true of all of us, isn't it, that we weren't designed by like a benevolent God or anything. We were designed by nature, and we weren't designed for a good moral purpose. So what we sort of say we prefer may be not be much fun for us. Okay, time's gone by pretty fast, so let me just quickly sum up my utilitarianism in the other departments and the other sort of ways of defining it. Okay, very quickly, I'm an act utilitarian rather than a rule utilitarian. Some utilitarians say it's not the actions that lead to greater pleasure. It's the rules you adopt. So, like, if you adopt a rule like never kill someone, if you apply it every time, leads to greater pleasure, then you should adopt that rule and stick to that rule even on occasions where it doesn't lead to greater pleasure. I don't really see why you would stick to the rule on occasions where it leads to greater pain. Also, I think that there's lots of reasons why on the act utilitarian view you'd stick to rules. There's lots of good reasons to stick to rules without it changing the whole ethos. Okay, moving swiftly on. I'm also you can also be a total view utilitarian or an average view. Now the difference there is that a total view utilitarian, which is what I am, wants to increase the total amount of pleasure in the world. By the way, I'm treating pain as like negative pleasure here. It's like the same thing, but the minus sort of levels. But an average utilitarian wants to maximize the total amount of pleasure divided by the number of creatures or people experiencing it. The reason I'm not an average view utilitarian is because I think it leads you to want to take the happiest person and kill everyone else to increase the average. It seems a bit nuts. There's something a bit nutty about the total view, in that you want to have all else equal. You want to have a kid for the kid's pleasure. You want to have as many kids as possible, have as many people as possible, as long as they each one had positive, even slightly positive amounts of pleasure. So something a bit not intuitively that's morally right. But I'd much rather swallow that, bullet than this other thing about killing everyone except one person. That seems a real non-starter to me. Okay, so I'll make two brief last points before we hit 15 minutes. Okay, it's very hard to sum up exactly why I'm a utilitarian. Most of it's taste, right? But there are kind of reasons as well. I've kind of stuck to it, even here in kinds of arguments against it. And basically, one of the reasons is I believe we've got to have a kind of moral system, because maybe I have a kind of instinct for having a unified system, but it just seems that if you get two conflicting principles going on, I think John Stuart Mill, another famous utilitarian, came up with this argument. If you get two conflicting principles at work when you're thinking about morals, you've got to kind of decide between them, and that means you've got to have an overriding system. And I've just found there's just hardly any moral systems out there on the market. The only other one I can think of is kind of basically this rights system which Robert Nozick is quite famous for championing. But that system really leads to quite a lot of immoral kind of conclusions. It's pretty much capitalism as a moral system, with all the bad things that capitalism does seem to happen under that system. So, and there really isn't much by way of other like universal systems. We've got like little systems for doing politics or whatever, but I just haven't. There's nothing quite like utilitarianism out there. So that's one reason I'm sticking with it. Fascinated to hear other systems. People have got them. Okay, a very quick last point, which I'll make in 30 seconds. Which I think I said this in my Stricter Qualities series very early on, is that a bit of a difference between me and other utilitarians, I think, is that I really think the long term is so important that actually the survival of the human race is actually more trumps kind of everything else really, and that even when we think about like animal rights or whatever, or animal welfare I should say, it's really this long term survival of the human race should, I think, is really important. Okay, thank you.